All right, welcome back in. Today I have a guest coach with me, Rachel Trotta, who is certified personal trainer, nutrition coach, works online primarily with women, a lot of moms, is a mom herself, has a great blog, which I spent a lot of time reading over the last week as I prep for this, and has been featured in, I'm going to list this here because it's worth noting like how impressive this is. Women's Health, Huffington Post, Pop Sugar, Well and Good, Peloton, and Slate, which is all of those are not a small deal and an indicator of how good a writer she is, but also how good a coach she is as well. As I Googled your website and immediately up 39 5-star reviews, which is just an absurd, like it's an indicator, like that's not the all, end all be all, but it's an indicator of like just fantastic coach. And Rachel and I got to meet at Raise the Bar in Dallas about a month ago. I'm excited to have her on. So thanks for coming on, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Jeff. It's good to see you again.
Absolutely. Yes. So we were talking before we recorded. We did like 15 minutes and I was like, we should probably turn on the recording here, talking about this. But I think it's a really important concept when we think about fitness and lives in general, and like what setting appropriate goals a little bit, because you are really good in talking about weight loss versus weight maintenance and that sort of a piece, but thinking about like when's the stopping point, I think, for a lot of people, which is a weird place to start the conversation. But when a lot of people are thinking about like, when will I have arrived? And then what does it look like in that place? This is that fit life concept that we were talking about. If you haven't listened to that episode, go back and listen to the episode on the fit life. But what does that look? How do you kind of help your clients define that goal and then flesh that out a little bit for staying there? Because I think a lot of people have been caught in the relationship with exercise and nutrition has forever been weight loss.
I mean, that's a great question, great topic to open with. There's so many different facets to this. And the first thing that I would say is starting with the end in mind. So if you're thinking about your own goals of weight loss or body composition change or an increase in your fitness, is not what's your ultimate goal in terms of weight loss, but ultimately what kind of lifestyle do you want to have once you've lost the weight? Because that can really inform what kind of strategies that you choose along the way. And I often find, relevant to our conversation earlier, which was not recorded. So maybe I'll try to backtrack.
Yeah,
and
we'll say it again.
Yeah, but the idea that sometimes you can define success differently than you thought, in terms of, you might, by a BMI chart, need, quotes, big air quotes for people who can't see, but you might need to lose 50 pounds, but would you be okay with losing 20 pounds if the resulting lifestyle at the end meant that you could keep it off without excessive pressure and stress? So those are the kinds of questions sometimes that people can ask themselves is, what do I want to be living at the end of this process? Because I'm going to need to keep this process going in order to maintain my results.
Yeah. As you think about that for you, because I know you have a little bit of your story as well, so maybe we can weave this into this, but that was kind of your start. You and I have a little bit of a similar beginnings in that we had a weight loss journey. Maybe not, I think you had a little bit more of a journey, if I remember right, than I did. But how did that play itself out for you initially with the initial weight loss process, in terms of not like defining that goal?
Yeah, in some ways, I think my own weight loss journey was super lucky. It happened so long ago that in some ways I almost can't even put myself back in that place of where was my mind then,
And maybe then
But
postpartum might be a little bit more relevant, because
yeah,
that's more
postpartum
recent,
is more
because
recent. Yes.
you have a 3-year-old going to be
Yes.
4 this summer, right?
Yeah, good memory. Yeah, so my initial weight loss was about 50 pounds now over 10 years ago. So, very different time in life.
Yeah.
I totally did not know what I was doing. I got
Yeah.
very lucky about certain things.
Hmm.
That experience did spark my interest in health and fitness and
Yeah.
led me to become a personal trainer, fitness nutrition specialist. Fast forward, then I got to have the humble pie of, having a kid
In
and
so
then
many ways. That's humble
oh,
pie.
in so many ways, yes. But having a kid and then really having that experience of,
Hmm.
oh, this weight is not as easy to lose
Hmm.
as it was the first time. So for
Hmm.
me, it was a lot about accepting what's going on in my life right now
Yeah.
and how do I fit my routines around what's actually going on right now. And that's true for a lot of people is they are comparing their fitness lifestyle at the moment to something that they had in an ideal world 10 years
Hmm.
ago or 20 years ago. And the truth
Hmm.
is, they're not doing the same things. Their lifestyle
Hmm.
has different demands, and it's not possible to
Hmm.
time travel those life circumstances forward into their current life. And I
Hmm.
compare that to, prior to having children, but also prior to moving to the suburbs. I lived in
Hmm.
New York City. I walked 20,000 steps a day
Yeah.
literally without trying.
Yeah.
And I had clients where I was running with them as part of their running coaching. So I'd run with a client and then
Hmm.
I'd go run with another client. And that's in the context of,
Yeah.
walking around. So I kind of had the lifestyle of like a semi-pro track
Yeah.
athlete. And
Yeah.
at the time, I gave good nutrition advice, but I also didn't have that somatic experience of what it's like to have a desk job,
Yeah.
to not be able to get up and move a lot. And then, flash forward when I needed to, not quote needed to lose the baby weight, but
Hmm.
whenever I had had my daughter and I thought, I'm really ready to get in super good shape again. I'd stayed
Hmm.
fit through pregnancy, but I was ready to take it to the next level again, to
Yeah.
find that it was a whole new toolbox of strategies that I needed to reach into, including even little things like we were joking about the other day. Like I have a walking pad in my
Yeah.
office because in some ways you're trying to artificially create circumstances in a good
Yeah.
way that lead to a more healthy lifestyle because it's not easy for it to happen organically. So,
Hmm.
I have to kind of shove things into my life to make it work. It's so that I don't do the thing that a lot of people can end up getting trapped in where it's 6 p.m., you've taken 2,000 steps, and then you're in a race with yourself to get in the other, whatever your goal is,
Yeah.
6 to 8,000 more steps, but you're tied to a treadmill after dinner trying to do it. So you have to be realistic, both in the sense of acceptance of my life isn't the same as it was at another time, but also realistic in terms of you probably can accomplish a lot of your goals, but you just need to be more creative and more outside the box with what strategies you're using.
So much fantastic there. Well, so this is going back to the conversation before we started recording, but this is a parallel with business that we talked about, which is, and I don't think Luca would have a hard time with me saying this, but Luca Hochevar, who is well known in the fitness industry and is known for his in, unbelievable work ethic, like self-proclaimed like workaholic sort of thing.
Hard
Like
worker.
he works all the time, like 6 a.m. to midnight every day, sort of thing. Um, has like 9 businesses, and I was talking to him at the Raise the Bar conference about stuff, and what we talked about beforehand is like I actually couldn't do what Luca does. Even like personality wise, it's not me, but also like I don't like he and I don't have the same limitations, but we also don't have the same desires. You know what I mean? Like Luke is trying to conquer the world a little bit. And I'm not right now. I'm just trying to hang out with my kids and have a nice thing for my family, and that's just where I am in my life. And so
Yes.
when you think about it's kind of a both and, right? There's the challenges or hurdles or however you want to call them, but there's also a reframe in the different senses of
The
circumstances into
destination.
in the destination. It might be
Yeah.
different for So when you think about coming back to it postpartum, because I
Hmm.
think this is a really relatable thing, because it's and I've done I'm in the midst of a whole pregnancy series right now, which is just a wild thing for me to talk about. But just having worked with a lot of clients in this, and the idea of like once you're postpartum, you're always postpartum, and you're not necessarily
Yes.
defined by that, but like
Hmm.
if you get in a car accident, your your body will forever have have
Hmm.
the scars, quote unquote, of having done that, like the markings of having done that. It
Hmm.
won't ever be exactly how it was pre car accident, and having a baby's like a car accident in terms of
Yes.
what it does to
Hmm.
your body. And so when you thought about, all right, now postpartum, because you'd always kind of been, post that 50-pound weight loss for, I guess, 7 years, then doing the
Long
math on the
time.
six
Hmm.
years, you
Hmm.
had this fit lifestyle that looked a certain way, and you exercised during pregnancy. But now postpartum, new phase of life in terms of
Hmm.
challenge, also not in the city, but in the suburbs, like some of those things.
Hmm.
But also maybe how did the goal, I don't know, shift, or how did that needle move? Did it move? And what did that look like
Hmm.
for you in that getting back into it process?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's kind of two aspects to it. One is that I think pre-kids, your lifestyle can be more shaped around your training and nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think post kids, it becomes the other way around. Your
Okay.
training and nutrition is fitting in around other things.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of, not that it's not a priority, but it's
No.
just, it can't be the anchor. The other things are the anchor that it's attached to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really big shift postpartum for a lot of women. But I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's not just women, it's all the parents, it's the
Yeah.
dads too. So just in terms of time management. And
Mm-hmm.
so the other aspect I would say too is it might influence what kinds of strategies you choose,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of the fitness industry, and I think this is something that a lot of people who are not in the fitness industry don't realize, is that a lot of weight loss and muscle gain advice is based on a part of our industry that's actually very unhealthy, which is the bodybuilding prep
Yeah.
industry, in terms of where we get a lot of our, you know, cultural influence around what's the
Mm-hmm.
right way to manage calories, what's the
Mm-hmm.
right way to plan meals. And if you don't have discernment about that, that if you don't want to have that in your lifestyle of, an approach that is centered around preparing for a physique competition, it can help you in terms of selecting strategies that might fit better, where you don't need to be quite as specific. You don't need to be quite as, quote, disciplined. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes people feel like the bar is so high in
Mm-hmm.
order to get fit. And it's because, in some ways, the fitness industry is holding the bar that high to
Yeah.
say, unless you do these things exactly right, you're not going to see progress. Versus bringing the bar lower psychologically, that's easier for people to grab onto, because if you're not planning on getting down to 15% body fat, you don't need to be
Yeah.
quite that specific or quite that rigid. There are much broader things that will have a huge impact on your life. But the problem is, when people feel like it's that hard, they either do like the binge restrict cycle of dieting and exercise, or they just never get started because they're waiting for that perfect time where something's going to change, where they have more time and they'll have more bandwidth. But realistically, that's not going to happen. So it's
Yeah.
better to just start easier and get started sooner.
Absolutely. When you think about those strategies, because I 100% agree with you. When you think about where the standard is currently held to, sort of thing, with what are some of those things where you're like, that's not necessary for
Mm-hmm.
the 95% of people who don't want to
Mm-hmm.
be flirting with at least a physique composition. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, maybe you're not actually going to do it, but like for the vast majority of people, that's an unnecessary thing. Not to say that it's bad, but it's not a necessary thing.
Yeah. I think that, and there's a few caveats on this, but I think that for most people, for example, not being overly specific about macros is just fine. In terms of what I would coach people is more education on food groups, portion sizing, how to eat healthier, how to avoid overeating. I think for the fitness industry, there's a lot of underestimation of that, of
Mm-hmm.
how, it's not about what someone's breakfast typically is as much as how much they're overeating at certain times, sometimes without realizing it
Yeah.
when they're dining out or, whatever the case is. So we don't have to be overly specific about macros, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion, because people can make tremendous gains in terms of their body composition, their weight loss goals, their muscle gain goals, not to mention just a healthier relationship with food and a better nutrition IQ, literally by just focusing on protein and portion control. If you
Yeah.
just focus on those two things, it fixes so many things. And people don't need to necessarily know what the calories are exactly. And I
Mm-hmm.
often find that when, with my clients, we start with kind of not, I wouldn't say a calorie free approach. I want them reading labels. We talk about how to compose meals, but I find over time that their
Yeah.
interest in macros organically grows
Yeah.
because their nutrition IQ is getting better and they can kind of glom onto it easier.
Mm-hmm.
But that feeling of from day one, if someone has to perfectly adhere to a diet,
Yes.
I think that's so unapproachable for most
Yeah.
people because a lot of people don't even know what protein is.
Yeah.
They don't know what fiber is. They don't know which foods are which. So it really helps to not be overly rigid.
The analogy I give is focusing on your macros is like focusing on your asset allocation for your
Right.
investments when you have $150,000 worth of student loans.
I completely agree. Or you're not saving at all.
Yeah. Yeah, you're not
Like you're
putting
not
any
even putting anything in.
you have a $5 balance in your Vanguard account and
Exactly.
you're like, "How am I going to
Exactly.
invest this $5?" And you're like, I mean,
Right.
you can't I mean, it's not
Yes.
a totally useless question, but it's probably not going to make any difference at all in your life.
Yes. It's more in the realm of hypothetical
Yeah,
rather than practical.
let's set an ideal standard when we don't it's or again, I use a lot of financial analogies, but the idea of like saying, all right, hey, I want you to save this much money and I want you to spend this much on rent or whatever it is, and you don't know how much is in your bank account. Like you haven't even looked at your bank
hmm
statement in forever. It's like, okay, how like we had to start somewhere that's
Right.
reasonable and understand what how much money do I have? Where is it going? Like what do I
hmm
spend my money on? I have I don't know if you get the pop-up ads, but like the subscription management things, it's like, oh, I'm
Oh,
spending
yes.
$90 on
hmm
subscriptions I don't even use. It's like that to me blows my mind a little bit. It's like, how are you spending this much money on subscriptions you don't even realize? But like
hmm
that's the financial equivalent of I haven't read a food label ever. And it's not better
Right.
or worse, but it's just like if you don't know what protein is, then me
Right. An
setting
overly
you
rigid diet is
yeah.
not going to help. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
100%.
Yeah. And I think, especially for women, and you could say in the postpartum period, you
Yeah.
could say perimenopause, where there's a
Yeah.
different hormonal need during that
Yes.
time. One of the most important things you can be doing is eating more protein
Mm-hmm.
and, eating more fiber rich carbs. And that does take knowledge. Like you really do
Yeah.
have to build up your knowledge base of how you're composing meals, what you're aiming for. But one of my issues with tracking, because I often have people come to me who have been tracking, especially
Yeah.
with something like Weight Watchers. There's a lot of
Yeah.
more mainstream things that people do. Is sometimes it's easy to miss the forest for the trees,
Mm-hmm.
where you're really, really focused on details, but you've zoomed in so much that you're not seeing the big picture.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not seeing like what is your meal actually made of, and sometimes to even step backwards more to look at the bigger routines of well, how are you making your meals? When are you
Mm-hmm.
shopping? How are you planning? And that's that architecture that goes into people being able to be successful with a
Mm-hmm.
nutrition change, but it's not overly specific because often if people plan, they do better anyway.
Yeah,
You know, almost no matter what they do, just the planning is going to help you. So,
absolutely. So some of those things, obviously, being aware of what it is you're eating, planning, trying to be a little bit more forward with protein and fiber and those types of things can make a big difference. Circling back to
mm-hmm,
the goal piece of it, though, how do I
mm-hmm,
know if this conversation is going to get me where I'm, you know what I mean? Like, because I
right.
think a lot
Mm-hmm,
of us have in our heads, I don't know if you ever did this, but like I used to, prior to like actually losing the weight and having it stay off, I used to like Google how to look like Chris Evans from
yes, you
Captain
have a model
America.
in mind,
Yeah, and I'm like,
right?
I'm
Uh-huh.
that's the standard. That's what I'm gonna look like.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a little bit of how do expectations align with that thing. If it feels
Mm-hmm.
like that's not enough, like that's not gonna get me where I want to get. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's different for each person in terms of where's the person starting is one of
Mm-hmm.
the first questions. Are they in a risky health place with their
Mm-hmm.
weight where they would benefit from losing, let's say, 50 to 100 pounds as quickly as possible?
Mm-hmm.
That's a person who's in a different position from someone who's had that kind of slow creep of
Mm-hmm.
20 to 40 pounds that's keeping them from looking as good as they want to look.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that that can't have cardiovascular health implications,
Yeah.
because it can for sure.
Yeah.
But it's a totally different place to be starting in. And I think that, the way I coach my clients is we're going to start by making changes. Week by week, we're going to start making changes. And the way that partly we assess how it's going is I'm not anti data in terms of how I work with
Mm-hmm.
clients. So we do weight, we do measurements, and we see what's happening with your body composition over like 2 to 3 week intervals. You don't
Mm-hmm.
expect it's going to be lower every time you step on the scale, but in terms of trends, you're seeing that line zigzagging down. And after a few weeks, you can get a sense of how quickly your weight is moving down. You get an even more accurate sense after a month or two what the pattern actually is. And then you just keep tweaking to keep improving all these different aspects of what you're doing with your fitness and nutrition. But it's not linear necessarily, because
Mm-hmm.
especially if you're starting off not as fit, there are going to be changes just because of your change in body composition as well. Because the more muscle you have, your metabolism is going to change, your
Mm-hmm.
exercise work capacity is going to change. How much you are actually generating power during workouts. That's
Mm-hmm.
going to change the way you're using calories. It's going to change the way, when you're eating, how your body is marshaling its resources to store calories. So it's going to change over time too as your workouts become tougher and tougher. But over time, you see what's happening and then you keep tweaking. And I think the biggest challenge for people is, I don't want to say it in a patronizing way,
Mm-hmm.
but it's patience. And I think that's such common, you know, it's such common cliche advice that I almost hate using the word patience. Oh, you
Yeah.
just need to be more patient. And I think a better way to say it is, you don't need to be patient forever, in the sense of, if you're doing something and it's just clearly not working,
Yeah.
nothing is happening, you're not losing weight, your measurements aren't going down, it's not working well for you. You need to make tweaks more aggressively.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're losing, let's say, a half pound to 2 pounds a week, your measurements are going down, your workouts are getting better. To use your, actor analogy, it's
Mm-hmm.
just that you're not going to look like that model you have for yourself in 3 months, which I
Yeah.
think is often, like the package that's sold
Yeah.
to us, is that's how quickly we're going to make progress. But
Mm-hmm.
just through that shift in body composition change over time, you probably will reach your goal, but it might take more like 6 to 24 months. And I don't think we really sell that in the fitness
Mm-hmm.
industry, that things
No.
can take that long. But that's that solid lifestyle change where you're doing things gradually enough that your body composition change is keeping up with you, but you're doing things in a non-crazed way in order to generate these changes. You're able to actually like go out to dinner with your family, go to happy hour with your friends, go on a vacation, and
Yeah.
you've just given yourself more slack for a long period of time. So you're not throwing yourself off track with these things.
Yeah, when we zoom out enough, and any
Mm-hmm.
it feels more reasonable. But like going one step further and thinking about weight maintenance, which I think again, so much of, and it's you and me, we both, it's just
Mm-hmm.
because it's what's needed in the fitness industry is weight loss, fat loss focused, because it's needed in a
Mm-hmm.
in a
It
world, in a
is, right.
country that's
Mm-hmm.
incredibly obese and unhealthy. We do need to do this. Like it's not like it's not being
Mm-hmm.
too ridiculous to talk about this. However, that's kind of the selling point, but the
Mm-hmm.
challenge is the maintaining those results once we
Mm-hmm.
get them, because oftentimes the faster we go, I don't know about you, but like I lost weight and gained it back. I lost and gained the same 15 pounds for like 3 years, like every
Mm.
6 months.
Postpartum, I had a similar experience. Mm-hmm.
Maintaining progress is oftentimes even more challenging, or maintaining the process long enough to
Mm-hmm.
see the results that we're hoping for. So that's the
Mm-hmm.
patience thing, but also, so when you reframe that, what I mean, thinking about your postpartum journey,
Mm-hmm.
what was the hang up, and then what
Mm-hmm.
shifted for you?
Yes, that's a great question. It's interesting that you say that about your own, that there was
Mm-hmm.
that roller coaster until it
Yeah.
finally hooked in. And again, to go back to that starting with the end in mind is the
Mm-hmm.
idea of, it might sound cliche, but you are focusing more on the lifestyle than you are on the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is that you're actually focusing on behaviors
Yep.
more than you're focusing on the weight loss. And
Yep.
that helps tremendously with weight loss maintenance, because even though with weight loss maintenance, yes, calories can be higher than whenever you were initially losing weight, by the same token, a lot of the behaviors are going to be exactly the same. You're going to
Yep.
keep exercising the same way. You're going to keep eating generally the same way with just a little bit more latitude. So you really do have to focus on the more process oriented, behavior oriented side of things. And for me, and I joke about this with clients, that after my daughter was born, I probably ate ice cream literally every single night for probably the first 2 years of her life. I mean, not a short amount of time. And I'm not talking about like a Yasso bar. I'm
Oh,
like, bring out the ice cream. And this
yeah.
is, a really fit, healthy person.
Yeah.
But I think it's something that all parents can relate to. And for some people, it's food. For some people, it's wine. But there is a feeling when your kid goes to bed
Yeah.
where you are just like, bring it on. Like you're so
Yes.
zapped at
Yep.
that. It's a real trigger time for parents with overeating, is like right when
Absolutely.
their kids go to bed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I had fallen into, was stress eating after she
Mm-hmm.
went to bed, because this was a new part of my life and a new stress I had never dealt with before. And I had always had an evening snack as part of my routine forever. I
Mm-hmm.
always ate after dinner and didn't feel like it was a problem, never was. Then, after she was born, that actually became problematic, because it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't just the snack anymore. It was the amount of food, because it wasn't just ice cream. I was also, oh, this is my second snack. And,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
where it was like food was soothing my stress, and it was
Yes.
part of my decompression routine. And that's definitely, if you're on a weight loss journey, it's something to look out for. And that's honestly also where macro counting is not going to help you tremendously.
Yes.
Is even if you have a great plan, if your relationship with food is such that it's part of, like I said, your decompression routine, it's part of how you soothe yourself, it's a big response to your emotions, then it is going to hold you back. You're going to have a really, really hard time making progress. So focusing more on behaviors is really helpful
Yeah.
because, for me, I was even using calorie tracking. I was trying to outsmart it and be like, well, if I eat 500 calories at night and I'm
Yeah.
trying to do the if it fits your macros kind of Tetris,
Yeah.
but the problem is for a smaller person, it ends up shrinking your other meals so
Yeah.
much that you're kind of starving all day. Not a good pattern to set
Well,
up.
and then you get to that and you're really hungry. And so
Oh,
now
you're worse. Yes.
it, yeah, that's a dangerous little game to play.
It's a bad setup.
Yeah.
And once I made peace with that more, that it
Hmm.
was just like, this snack's gotta go. Like
Hmm.
I'm not doing this in a healthy way. It
Hmm.
is a trigger for me. I need to find another way to decompress in the evening.
Yeah.
And it required me to be a lot more present to myself, to be more
Hmm.
mindful of like just the physical sensations of stress and, to be more in myself in terms of understanding that I needed to decompress at that time and needed to soothe myself. And then once that behavior changed, it really was like the rest of the weight loss was easy and then easy to keep off afterward.
That's so interesting. Do you have a nighttime snack now, or is it still
No,
no go?
I just
That's so
decided
interesting.
it was just not the right fit for
Yeah.
me anymore. I'm not saying never,
Yeah.
but that it just not
Yeah.
working for me.
100%. Well, and so this is so interesting because I have like two client stories that I think are really related to this. So, that are just like in the last hour and a half, like before we got on, like two clients back to back that had somewhat similar stories. So it was, if you're having, ice cream, a couple glasses of wine every night to decompress, I'm not saying that you can't have them, but that's the low hanging fruit, right? Like that is
Hmm.
macro counting isn't probably the first place for you to begin. So I had a client who was like talking to me about he had just started tracking his calories because he was like, I got to
Hmm.
kind of see what's happening. And I'm with you. I don't, it's not even on the table until like 4 to 6 weeks in. Some people never do
Hmm.
it.
Hmm.
But he was like, I want to kind of see what's happening because I can't quite figure out what's going on. And
Hmm.
he's like, I don't feel like I'm eating all that much, but I can't seem to. I'm like, well, let's like look at what you're eating. And he would trying to keep a food journal, but he was just like having a hard time with it. And he's like, man, and then
Hmm.
so he started for like a couple weeks. And he was like, man, my protein shake is like 700 calories.
Right.
I'm like, okay, that seems odd. That was wild. I don't know what's going on with
Yeah,
their
I
thumbs up
know.
there.
It was the hand gesture.
Yeah, but I was like, okay, that seems. He texted that to me before I even looked at it. And then I was
Hmm.
like, okay, that might be something for us to explore. But then I looked at his thing and it was like pint of Ben and Jerry's or a couple of drinks or slices of pizza basically every day at the end of the day. And I'm like, dude, there's the 700 calorie protein shake maybe isn't the top of our priority list right now
Hmm. Hmm.
because it's all decent stuff in there. And you're getting like 50 grams of protein. He's doing 2 scoops of protein. Like it was a
And
big
for a
protein shake.
man,
He's a
it's
big dude.
not,
Like I'm like,
I
dude,
was going to say,
I was
maybe
like,
not inappropriate.
you're only eating 3 meals. Like your meals can be
Hmm.
700, 800 calories and you're
Exactly.
fine.
Hmm. But he was
But
very quick to judge that.
the problem is not the protein
Hmm.
shake. The
Yes.
problem is the pint of
Yes.
Ben and Jerry's. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like we're missing the forest for the trees a little bit here, where
Hmm.
it's like it's very easy to get into like, oh, I have to. It's not the little things; it's those other things. And then the other one was a client who was like stress eating handfuls of nuts in a certain circumstance with
Hmm.
work. And I was like, well, what is it with the nuts? She's like, there's something about the crunch that's like I can be like
Hmm.
almost aggressive with it. And then there's something soothing about the like
Hmm.
savory nature of it. I'm like, so that's what we're looking for. I'm not saying that you can have a snack, right? And like we can try to get 80% of it.
Hmm.
Like she's gonna do this is gonna sound like a big leap, but for her, this she came up with it. She's like, I really like celery sticks and I really like kind of a little bit of a not non-fat cottage cheese that's got some like saltiness to it. I was like, by all means, have at it. Like I
Right. She was
like
looking for
if
that
that's what
crunchy
I
replacement.
was like, that's fine. But
Hmm.
know that that's still not going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about like you need a way to deal with your aggression that you need to get
Mm-hmm.
out, and you also need something that's going to soothe you. That's
Mm-hmm.
not food. Here, I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, go punch a pillow and then listen to your favorite song. Like that's what we're looking
Mm-hmm.
to do here a little bit. And so thinking about the relationship with food,
Mm-hmm.
piece of it, and particularly for parents, right? Because I think that you're absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
Like my wife and I both, like last night, my wife came home and she's like, "We're out of wine. Like we don't have any wine in the house."
This
And
is a problem.
I was just like, "This is a problem." And I'm like, I
Yeah.
think you'll be okay." She's like, "We don't have." I'm like, "We don't have anything, hon." And she's like, "I don't know what I'm gonna do."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, "She's like, do I have one of the kids' fruit snacks?" I'm like, "This is maybe like, like this is maybe showing you something." She's like,
Yes.
"Yeah,
Yeah.
like you're not wrong." But it is. It's that routine of like the stress of parenting is not a small thing. So thinking about
Mm-hmm.
those, what were the ways that you have shifted your day to day to make it so the evening is not a place where you're like, oh, I'm in desperate
Right.
need of a snack or wine or ice cream, because to just go like, hey, I'm
Yeah.
not doing it, like you're clearly getting it somewhere else. So what are some of those strategies, like the punch the pillow
Right.
strategies for you throughout the
Right.
day?
Right. I mean, I think honestly, some of it is just that physical mindfulness and presence, being more aware that you're stressed out. I mean, I think that's right at the top of the list for me is
Mm.
just more tolerance for discomfort of
Oh,
that,
well said.
whew,
Mm.
like that was, whew,
Yeah.
crazy tonight.
Yeah.
Just being able to feel that and not being able to turn to food. Then I think there's a lot of mechanical changes that you can make too
Mm.
that are kind of in the family of changes that your client was talking about. Like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's celery, maybe it's cottage cheese. That, I love this specific brand of like a stevia sweetened cola.
Mm-hmm.
And that for some people would be, and at night I would say decaf, a
Mm-hmm.
non-caffeinated
Yeah.
Diet Coke or something where it's still something enjoyable, but it's not something that is going to torpedo what you're working
Yeah.
on. Just from a sheer calorie point of view, you're
Mm-hmm.
not adding on to your burden and
Mm-hmm.
creating more of a stress cycle around it because what you're
Yeah.
doing doesn't have any negative consequences whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
So, you're just reducing the load of that. But I think also on the flip side, from a mechanical point of view, whenever you're not trying to, in a Tetris style, pull more calories, basically in order to protect acting out with food, like you're acting out routines, when
Mm-hmm.
you're not trying to pull calories in to do that, what happens is your other meals get more pumped up
Mm-hmm.
because you actually have more room to
Yes.
have larger meals. And so then also when you do that, you're not as hungry at night. If
Mm-hmm.
your dinner is bigger, it lasts longer.
Yeah.
So that's a pattern that I see in a lot of women is trying to over control the things that seem controllable. So if you think about breakfast, lunch, the meals that a lot of parents have by themselves, those will be very shrunk down to, I mean, epically diet sized proportions where it's
Mm-hmm.
basically just protein and vegetables. There's
Mm-hmm.
no fat, there's no carbs. It's like 200 calories of pure
Yeah.
protein and fiber, but it's really not enough to be satisfying.
Yeah.
But then that starts teeing up the nighttime binge as
Yes.
well, like you were saying earlier. So there is a little flip that can happen too if you make an agreement with yourself that I'm not going to engage in the acting out routine, but I am going to give myself more latitude at other times to feel more abundant and to not feel so locked in and rigid to the perfect diet plan. And
Mm.
often that can help create the flexibility where then maybe you don't need it at that time. But I would also add a third level if there is just neural wiring as well, that you do get used to things. So if
Yeah.
you repeat something over and over, your brain chemistry gets very used to that reward to where you feel
Mm-hmm.
like you literally cannot not have it.
Yeah.
And the truth is, if you take it away, those neural patterns will wither and will get used to not having it so
Mm.
that over time your cravings really do reduce because it's just not a habit anymore. It's not being reinforced. So that's another, to go back to the patience thing, is
Mm-hmm.
you can start doing something and it feels really hard, but if you hang in there for, weeks, months, I can almost guarantee you your brain chemistry is going to change, assuming you're actually getting enough calories and the right distribution of food throughout the day. You will
Yeah,
be okay. You will get used to it.
absolutely. When we think about, I say absolutely a lot. Do you ever have those moments where you're like, I say this a lot? I just had a moment where I
Oh,
realized I've
yes.
said absolutely like 9 times in this podcast. Um, because I think I used to say 100%, and then I used to say for sure. So I'm coming up with a new thing every now.
I said totally for a long time until an
Yeah,
older client laughed one time when I said it non ironically. And
yeah,
then I realized I did sound like a valley girl every
yeah.
time I said it.
Totally.
Yeah. And then I
That's
was like,
so.
oh, I need to stop saying that.
Oh, jeez. Oh, I say like people ask me how I'm doing. I'll say like I'm groovy, just to not just say the like I'm fine thing. And I'm like, that's such a
Hmm.
nerd thing to say, but and
Yeah.
people laugh at me. But like to me, I'm like, that's what I say. I think I
Blast from the
probably said
past.
that when you came on. How you doing? I
Yeah.
was like, I'm groovy, or
It's a
I'm rocking
nice
and rolling.
trademark.
Yeah, it's just something. It's just weird things. Well, I love that piece of it because it's the idea of, you said something in there which is like increasing, how did you phrase it? I didn't write it down because but it was so good, like increasing my tolerance for hard, basically.
Hmm. Hmm.
Which is, I think, particularly for moms and parents in general, like the tolerance for hard, I think the visceral reaction is, my whole dang life is hard. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
I'm all hearted out.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like I can't, and that's, I
Hmm.
think oftentimes what happens at night is like I don't have the ability anymore to say no, because I've been saying no to my kid all day. Like I can't say no to
Hmm.
me anymore. I can't parent me
I've
because I've
been
been
the
parent.
adult all day.
Yeah,
I need to
yeah,
not be the adult.
yes, that feeling. And
Hmm.
so the increasing the tolerance for hard piece, I think, is really interesting, particularly for parents. And I want to put it in this scenario because I know that you have some really cool strategies around this. But like, I think about dinner time, right? So we talk about bedtime.
Hmm.
Bedtime is hard, right? Like the 2 hours from like 5 p.m. to
Yes.
7 p.m. is the worst of the day.
It's a
Like just
gauntlet.
it's a really
Hmm.
well,
Hmm.
well said way to do it. It is a gauntlet every day that you are going through, and it's like my wife is like, I gotta just run to a quick appointment today at 5:30. I'm like,
Better reschedule that,
I'm
miss.
like, is that the only time you can?
Yeah.
That is right in the middle of it. I'm
Yeah.
gonna be buried
Hmm.
at that point. But like dinner time, I think is oftentimes a challenge. And you talked about the meals, like breakfast and
Hmm.
lunch, being like, hey, oftentimes I can kind of do that. Sometimes without my kids, depending on the circumstances. If I'm stay at home, I'm doing it with my kids. But dinner time is a family affair, and you're
Hmm.
like, I'm caring for the children and I got to feed the children. And that's another thing of like, that's the hard, and that's the parent. And like, how do I
Hmm.
feed me and feed them when they don't want the thing that they asked for because it's
Hmm.
on the wrong colored
Hmm.
plate and I can't do it anymore. Like, what are some of your strategies? One, I mean, you could talk just about dinner in general, but also just
Hmm.
like parenting
Hmm.
through the hard a little bit.
Right, right. Well, one thing I would definitely agree with is that dinner is, it's the most chaotic juncture of the
Mm-hmm.
day, where everyone's ending work, kids are coming home from preschool or from school, there's a lot of competing needs, and then with younger kids, you're on that shoot to bedtime, which
Mm-hmm.
in itself can involve a lot of things like stalling,
Mm-hmm.
tantrums. You're challenged at that time. And something that I talk about with dinners is, I think you can approach it from two levels and make it a lot less stressful. So the first level would be whatever you're doing with your earlier meals of the day, breakfast and lunch, in order to conform to your diet goals, I think can and should relax at dinner time, because you are in a family environment. And in my opinion as well, you should not be dieting in front of your kids. And there are
Mm,
asterisks and caveats all over that for me in
yeah.
terms of, you could back up to saying, well, you shouldn't be dieting earlier in the
Mm,
day if that's the case. But what I
yeah.
mean is, if you have certain goals for your diet, you should not impose that at dinner
Yeah.
because you might be unnecessarily changing the architecture of like a normal family meal that's truly fine for everyone and fine for you. And you might want to deploy different skills like portion control,
Hmm.
measuring things, good meal composition, but you don't need to be overly worried about being super specific about nutrition at dinner
Hmm.
because you may just be layering on more stress. Because then the second level of that is what you might make yourself vulnerable to is feeling like I need to make myself a separate healthy
Yes.
diet mom dinner, and then everyone else is going to have something else. Now,
Yeah.
in your case, I don't know, you were saying you might be the cook for your family, but
I am.
I guess I would address this either to moms or whoever's the primary cook. The problem is when you're cooking your own meal and you're cooking everyone else's
Yeah.
meal, you're adding another layer of stress onto a time of the day that's already pretty stressful.
Yeah.
And so I go more with the guidelines from the pediatric dietitian Ellen Satter. This is the division of responsibility in feeding, and you'll find this echoed all over Instagram by pediatric dietitians, which is that you really should eat the same food as your kids and not prepare multiple meals, partly because kids learn from seeing you model as well. So if you want to cultivate a certain food culture in your home where you want to foster your kids eating a certain way, it's so important that they're practicing it in the context of you also eating it and modeling enjoyment. And then the flip side of that, division of responsibility and feeding is that it's also okay if your kids don't eat it all, or if they only eat certain parts of it, or if they barely touch it. Because the truth is, they're getting their nutrition needs met overall. If
Mm,
assuming that all of the meals are complete and there's good snacks, it's
mm.
not a huge deal if they don't chow down at dinner time with you or if they pick at it. Because that's the number one thing I think parents can do to reduce their stress is to make one family meal that meets more in the middle. It's neither extremely diety, and on the other hand, it's also not extremely kid focused. It's
Yeah.
much more meeting in the middle and allows that to migrate toward the center. And I think that that can make that dinner time passage so much easier.
So much good stuff there. I want to go here and then I want to go there. So
Yeah.
here being about dinner, because I think this leads us into the next thing, but about dinner, I love so much of that. What would you say? Because I'm genuinely curious about this because it's an ongoing thing. I think as a parent, because there are days where it's like, okay, I put the meal in front of you, and I feel good about my part of it. Like I have done my job. There is a quality meal in front of you. I don't want this, daddy. And it's a little bit of like, do I do the thing where it's like, you're going to bed hungry then, kiddo?
Mm-hmm.
Or, because it's hard because you don't want to be like, all right, well then what do you want? Because you got to eat something because that's a
Right.
then why would they ever eat what you put in front of them?
Mm-hmm.
So what are your strategies for
Mm-hmm.
the moments where like they don't eat anything or they like, just push
Mm-hmm.
it away, you know what I mean? And I don't know if you experience this or things like that, but wanting like, hey, fed is best,
Mm-hmm.
that idea is like fed is
Mm-hmm.
best,
Mm-hmm. Right. Not
but
adhering to a perfect plan.
it doesn't
Right.
have to be. And so
Mm-hmm.
like, hey, you do all these strategies, I put the meal in front of you, and for whatever reason, not happening, not going to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
What then?
Yeah, so I definitely would recommend reading Ellen Satter's book, Child of Mine, because
Mm,
it's so practical. It's a little bit older, but you'll see a lot of Instagram accounts like Snacks with Jax, things like that, where it's using the same model, but just newer information. For me, something that I really focus on, and the book recommends it, or the whole methodology recommends it, is that you always have safe foods at dinner
yeah.
that you are pretty sure your kid's going to
Yeah.
eat no matter what.
Yep.
And you do introduce some discomfort zones as well, like some
Hmm.
more challenging foods. and you present it without comment, in the sense of you're not saying, oh, you should eat this, or
Mm-hmm.
this is good for you. You're not pressuring the food. You're
Yeah.
just giving everyone the same thing. And then you're including some things that you know are pretty safe bets as well. And then if your child eats in what looks to you like an extremely unbalanced way, a lot of it, to go back to the tolerance of discomfort, you have to tolerate your own discomfort and accept that that's the way they ate that night. That's fine. They probably got enough, whatever, protein, etc., other times of the day. And that can actually help to foster a really healthy relationship with food for kids as well, because they don't feel pressured, and they also don't start forming those categories in their mind, which as adults, we unfortunately have. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily a good thing, where it's the healthy foods you should eat, which are less enjoyable, and then
Yes.
the unhealthy foods, which are awesome, that you
Yeah.
can't have as much as you want. So, for example, we make a lot of things where I'll make sure there's either a bread or a pasta as part of it. Or, my daughter randomly really likes curry, which is like
So
such an odd,
that's atypical.
sophisticated taste. Yeah. And so I always make sure, like every few weeks, I'm making curry. I make sure that everything's not all mixed. I
Yeah.
make sure things, the way it's presented to the whole family, is everything is separate. And then if I want to mix it, I do. But that's what I mean about the not making overly diety meals, is that I wouldn't do like a big salad for dinner, because it's probably not a food format my daughter's going to engage with super well.
Yeah.
I'm not saying she doesn't eat salad, but I would say it's a much safer bet, if I want to include a vegetable in the meal, to have either a cooked vegetable that has some salt, some olive oil, or some cheese on it, or to do a raw vegetable that I know she likes, rather than, a salad where it's the uber mix,
Yeah. It's a
which
little
most kids don't care
vegetable
for. Kids
forward.
tend to not like mixed foods.
Yeah.
So, you can try to present it in a safe way. And then, the way I've heard one person say it is the way, especially as your kids become more verbal, if they say, oh, I don't like this, to, say, oh, okay, well, did you have a request for tomorrow or for later this week, to help engage them in it and make it not make them feel like they're not heard or like their
Mm.
opinions aren't important, but also to have a sense of, this is a family project, like this
Yes.
is what we're all eating tonight. And then, another day, you might get lucky and it's one of your favorite meals too.
Yeah.
So I think there's positive ways to both to frame it verbally with your kid, but then also there's strategic things you can do to make sure that your kid doesn't literally not eat every night, which can stress you out.
The piece that you touched on a lot there, and then throughout this, and I think this is maybe a good place to start to wrap up here, which
Mm-hmm.
is, and it's tough to do this in 5 minutes or so, but modeling for your kids healthy
Mm-hmm.
versus unhealthy. Because I don't know about you, but I say this in a weird way, but like kind of jokingly, but most of my job is helping people unlearn the unhealthy language that they
Mm-hmm.
have around food and
Mm-hmm.
exercise
Yes.
that they've had their whole life. And it usually
Mm-hmm.
comes back to the child thing. And it was a little bit of the generation we grew up with, which is like, you eat all your food and this is junk food and
Oh,
this is
a
healthy
plate
food.
cleaning
Yeah. The
generation for
clean
sure.
plate cub
Mm-hmm.
and all of that type
Mm-hmm.
of stuff, which is, um, I guess, more of a neutral language around it, but also like a body image. Like, your kids see you weighing your food,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like the idea of
Right.
like,
Yes.
it's so you don't want to like, hey, I'm going to impose my diet thing, or I'm doing, like, you don't want your kids necessarily to watch you dieting in that sense, but like, you also want to model for them that healthy relationship with the food, and even that healthy body image, which
Right.
is maybe even a step beyond what we're talking about here, but like modeling that for them while still not feeling like you got it all together, if that makes any sense.
Right, right. Well, and I think some of that is individual too, in terms of self-reflection of, what do you think is healthy? What are your values? And what do you want to pass on? Like, what are you comfortable with your kids seeing?
Mm.
Because I don't think there's a black and white of, your kids shouldn't see you weigh your food.
Yeah.
Or, I don't think there's a black and white there, but I can say from personal experience that, there's a lot of overweight in my family of origin. And my mom
Mm,
has always struggled with her weight very much. And there was a lot of dieting growing up. There was a big dichotomy between dieting and then like eating normal, which was, to be honest, like not a very nutritious
yeah.
diet. Like there
Is
was a
not
really
a good normal. Yeah.
no, it wasn't a good normal, and there was a huge swing between the two. So I think that for myself, it has always been of utmost importance that I want to model someone who's happy with their body, who's a confident eater, who's not dieting, who's not obsessing about food. And for me personally, that translates into things like not weighing or, overly measuring food. I would say I'm using like a measuring cup to cook things. I'm not
Yeah.
like, oh, just free, like I'm pouring the bag into the bowl,
Yeah.
but I'm not, sitting at the table and carefully portioning things onto my plate or anything.
Yeah.
I'm trying to model more intuitive eating skills. And even verbally, she's so young that in some ways, like you can be
Mm,
more almost obvious in terms
mhm.
of like, I'm feeling full. I'm going to stop.
Yeah.
You're also modeling how do you know when enough is enough? And how do you
Yeah.
model that without necessarily educating about calories? Because I think something that a lot of people, and this is also coming from, side note, this is not in my bio, but I actually used to be a teacher. So
Yeah.
this is
Me too.
coming from, okay, that doesn't surprise me. So this is coming from my experience of partly for teaching, that
Yeah.
people underestimate how much kids think like adults because they don't.
Yeah.
They really don't think like adults. The younger the kid, the much more they're in like a dreamlike state.
Mm,
They're really filtering things through like their attachment to their parents and through their imagination. As they get older, that starts to solidify more. But honestly, people's that prefrontal cortex and all those connections, they really don't stop developing until people are 25 or so.
mm-hmm.
So when you think about a young child, that is partly why younger kids tend to be more prone to eating disorders, and why it can start so young is because you think, oh, I'm logically thinking about this. I'm going to explain what's healthy and unhealthy. I'm going to explain calories. But your teenager or kid or young teen, they're not processing it the same way that you are. And it's much easier for them to develop a distorted view of it. And I think that's why it's so good to kind of pull back and think about, well, what are the values you're trying to communicate?
Yeah.
Because you don't necessarily need to educate on the specifics, because they'll figure that out themselves, or they'll
Yeah.
ask, or they'll learn it as they get older. But you don't need to know the specifics to have a healthy relationship with food. And I think sometimes people can get in a panic about, if they didn't grow up knowing good nutrition IQ, that they need to impart that to their kids. But the
Yeah.
truth is, if you just work on your own
Yeah.
relationship with food, and you are a healthy model, and you seem satisfied with yourself and what you're
Yeah.
eating, and you're not pressuring your kids will figure it out.
Well, that goes back to where we started the very beginning of the conversation, which is the specifics are less necessary than the principles and the process.
Exactly.
And so the principles in the process, if we understand those things of like, hey, we're going to get relatively nutritious food and we're going to eat till we're 80% full or mostly full, and we're going
Mm-hmm.
to eat foods that we enjoy and not really boring foods that
Mm-hmm.
are have some value, but also, we're not going to totally sacrifice taste for the sake of, quote unquote
Mm-hmm.
health, because that's usually not the issue, right? Like the dinner you're having with your
Mm-hmm.
kids usually is not the biggest issue. It's
Yeah,
all
it's
the other
probably
stuff.
fine.
Yeah. So like
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
let's make this a little bit more of a positive thing. And what you're showing them is the idea of having a logical conversation with your kids. Like all I have to do is have one conversation with my child to realize that they're not logical beings. Like that doesn't,
Yes.
you can't,
Yes.
you
My
can't
daughter
like,
thinks Mulan is real.
yeah, it's
You know.
not, they're not logical
Yeah.
beings. And so trying to be
Yeah.
like, this is why this is happening is like, you got to find what is the why. And so like the idea of like weighing your food, like why am I weighing? I just want to make sure I have enough energy to play with you, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's a
Mm-hmm.
way of framing it um,
Right. Mm-hmm.
that's a positive thing. And or announce, like, why are we having this? Well, we're having this because I want to make sure, like, what is the food for? It's not necessarily the language around. I'm not going to be, you're not going to get big and strong, but like, this is the proteins to help you get strong. The,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the carb is for you to have energy. The fats are so that you're healthy. The vegetables are so you're full. Like what do these things do? That's the nutrition IQ. That's the body. Like when you exercise, it's like, mommy isn't exercising to lose weight, even if you are,
Mm-hmm.
right? Mommy is
But they don't
exercising.
need to think about it that way.
They
Right.
no, mommy is
Mm-hmm.
exercising to be healthy, which is a
Mm-hmm.
byproduct of losing weight, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you're not wrong. You're not lying to them. You're not. But it's a
Mm-hmm.
way of framing it. That's a, what are the benefits of this
Yeah.
versus
Mm-hmm.
the, because that's where kids think. It's like, oh, I want, like, you can get a kid hyped about anything. Like, we're gonna
Yeah.
go rake the leaves. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you can get
Mm-hmm.
them hyped about this in a positive way if we frame it that way. And oftentimes it's like, hey, it'd be probably better for us if we acted a little bit more like kids.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say is that, and it's a good wrap up of
Yeah.
that topic is the way that you would communicate your values to your kid, what you think that highest form is,
Mm-hmm.
ironically, is the thing that will help you pave the way to maintaining weight loss because you are focusing more on the positive relationship with it, the sustainability, the values behind it. So, in some ways, even though parenting can be so stressful, it is a
Yeah.
gift because it's a new filter that you can put
Yes.
things through to decide how important things really are.
Well, and the stakes are higher. The stakes are higher for
Absolutely.
parenting. Like
Hmm.
there's more to it than just like, oh, I want, there's not to say that I want to look good in a swimsuit is a bad reason, but like, I want to
Hmm.
feel confident in a swimsuit so I can play with my kids in the water.
Right.
It's one
Hmm.
layer deeper
And there's
to,
not a weight you have to be in order to do
nope.
that. That's the thing you come back around to once it's more
Yes.
healthy. Hmm.
100%. Well, Rachel, I appreciate this so much.
Hmm.
We did a full lot. We could have gone for another hour and a half, but I know we got to go because we
Totally.
both have kids.
Totally.
Um, but just really appreciate you coming on. I'll let you plug yourself here, but I'm going to put Rachel's website in the show notes. There's Rachel Trotta, 2 T's and an A at the end. But anything in particular, I know you have some guides and some things like that on the website. Anything you want to maybe point people toward that might be a good place to
Yeah, I
go?
mean, something that a lot of parents might appreciate, ironically, even though we've talked so much about not using calories and macros so much, I
Mm,
do have a cookbook free download on my site that has
yeah.
easy 5 ingredient meals that have all of the nutrition facts. And actually, all of the nutrition facts are preloaded into MyFitnessPal if someone uses
Wow.
MyFitnessPal. So they can download that and then have some easy ish lunches and dinners for their family.
I'm definitely downloading that because I always
And
get,
I'm a foodie, so they taste
yeah.
good.
Oh, good. Yes, absolutely. Well, Rachel, I really appreciate you coming on. Again, I'll link that,
I
and I'll
appreciate
also
it.
put the link for the specific URL for the guide because I'm gonna go look
Okay,
for it
awesome. Yeah.
immediately after this. So
Mm-hmm.
that'll be there, and you can follow her on Instagram. It's at Rachel Trotta, right? I lost
At
it.
Rachel Trotta, CPT.
Yeah, CPT on Instagram. Thanks so much for coming on, Rachel, and
Thank you.
appreciate everybody listening. And we'll see you next time.